I like sketchy, unusual adventures, like driving across the Cannonball Bridge at Vincennes, Indiana. It's one of those things where you'll likely be okay, but the chance of death can't be totally ruled out. Let's face it, I'm a 10-year-old boy trapped inside an adult's body. Maybe you can identify. And when it comes to ruins and forgotten places, from 100 to 200 years ago, I am totally in. Southern Indiana does not disappoint. From quarries deep inside the earth, ghost towns along the back roads, abandoned historic homes, buildings of unknown purpose, or a university in the woods that hasn't seen students in eons. Histories that go back to the Revolutionary War. And unless there's a no trespassing sign, we'll take a peek inside. Come along for a sketchy adventure as we explore part 2 of the ruins and forgotten places of Southern Indiana. I was driving across Rushville, doing a segment about unusual Indiana graves, when I came across this beauty. Dr. Jefferson Helm built this classical revival home in 1845. That was about 16 years before the Civil War. Not exactly a mansion, but also not roughing it. The plan for this historic place isn't clear. Neither is the view inside. The windows are covered, and you can't see anything. This central Indiana find is pretty cool, but if you drive south, there is much more to see. Traveling to Aurora, we find the Riverside Cemetery. If you're like me, the old ones are the best, and quite often have unusual things to see. The fact that ancient people also buried their dead here adds to the cool history. Some of the structures are pretty amazing, but I was most intrigued by the structure underneath the shade trees. Was it an admin building, a chapel, or another place to store bodies? If so, the door wasn't very wide. But realize that many buildings of this period were unnecessarily fancy despite their function. As the door wasn't locked, I peeked inside. Today, it looks like a storage place. Maybe it always was. But imagining dead bodies stacked up to the ceiling makes for a better story. Outside of Madison, in a clearing on a hill, is an interesting stone building. Built in the 1850s, this was the Lutheran College. It was one of the first places to offer higher education to both women and African Americans, even before the Civil War. The founders were very forward-thinking for their time and provided a vital station along the Underground Railroad. The limestone exterior was built to last. In fact, it's been here about 174 years. There's a rope to ring the bell. The inside has been restored for both posterity and community events. Amazing, historic places like this one are hidden across southern Indiana. You just have to look. Also outside Madison is this old stone building. When you're an outsider and there is no information kiosk, you can only make an educated guess. As it's small and low to the ground, I'll place bets on it being a spring house, a building covering a spring that provided clean drinking water. But in full disclosure, I've been known to be wrong a time or two, and even more so since I got married. Northeast of Seymour is this abandoned school at Reddington. At one time, there were small schools like this one all over the Indiana counties. But with the creation of large school buses, students could be easily taken to consolidated schools. And thus, these became obsolete. When I drive west to Corydon, my GPS takes me through Palmyra, where I found this stone building. I'm sure somebody owns it, but there wasn't a no trespassing sign. I stopped to take a look. Someone thoughtfully added an awning to preserve this historic place. This is solid Indiana limestone. In 500 years, all the modern homes around it will be gone, while this one will still be here. But there's no further information about its past. There's an old water pump. Inside, it looks like something from Europe. If you told me that Vikings made this, I might believe you. Just one of many stories I'll likely never know. The Hardinsburg is an old cemetery that goes back well over 100 years. And atop the hill, a sturdy old mausoleum. It always amazes me how much money people spend for a final resting place. Quite often, after many years have passed, there are no descendants to look after their upkeep. In this case, you can see a wooden coffin exposed to the elements. 365 days a year, winter, spring, summer, and fall. Eventually, the wood will rot until the person inside is also exposed to the elements. So much for a fancy mausoleum. At Miltown, Indiana is the Speed Quarry. From a distance, it's one of the most impressive hills in the county. On the other side is a huge, dramatic opening. The tunnels go back a very long distance, and there are many local legends. I can remember driving by in my 20s, seeing these wide open entryways, and wondering what's inside. According to the owners, it's a potential death trap. Long after dynamite has been used to loosen debris, huge rocks from the ceiling can fall on you. And if the thought of death is not enough of a deterrent, they also prosecute trespassers. Just across the highway and down the road is an old lime kiln. Camouflaged by foliage, it's virtually invisible. You wouldn't know by looking at it, but this used to be a very busy place. Limestone from the quarry would be taken here and heated to about 1600 degrees Fahrenheit, turning it to calcium oxide, otherwise known as lime. Thereafter, it could be used to make concrete. The process itself is ancient and was used all the way back in Roman times. The town of Miltown itself has many abandoned buildings from the past. It used to be a large town with many businesses, anchored by a milling operation, hence the name Miltown. The mill is now gone. Several fires have destroyed buildings in town, and many people moved to bigger cities looking for work. Only a few businesses remain. With empty buildings, a mere shadow of their past. In its glory days, it used to have a Greyhound bus station. It's now used for storage by Cave Country canoes. There's a massive old storefront. And the largest building in town. Also used for storage. With the right money and vendors, this could be just as big as Nashville, Indiana is today. Southeast of Miltown is White Cloud. Once a busy small town with a school and businesses, it's now a quiet neighborhood community. I love these old gas pumps. White Cloud is a time capsule of what small town America used to be, and perhaps what it should be again. At Sulphur, there's a classic service station along the rural highway. Before chain gas stations dominated the landscape, it was the small town service station that made sure you had everything you needed to keep your car or truck on the road. Peeking inside, you can see the lobby and the garage. Some say that the large corporate gas stations of today are progress, but I'm not so sure. You pump your own gas, buy your food at self-checkouts, and never even speak to a single human being. Maybe we've lost something we didn't know we needed. West of Sulphur, at St. Croix, we find an unremarkable spot along the road. And an unusually large parking lot. But for what? While totally unmarked, across the street is a prehistoric place, the Potts Creek Rock Shelter. You will have to cross a creek, and it can be deep at times. It's much easier to find when the foliage is down, but it's only a short walk from the road. Prehistoric tools have been found here and cataloged by Indiana University. These were dated at over 1,000 years ago. There are many other prehistoric places in Indiana, but this is by far the easiest one to get to. Driving northwest and into the countryside, we arrive at Birdseye, Indiana. This is a classic one-room schoolhouse. I don't have any information about the year it was built, but I would guess late 1800s or early 1900s. It's got some pretty good age to it. Once upon a time, a bell was perched atop the tower, and it rang to let students know that school was in session. Today, it's a storage place, like many others like it. It makes us think about a simpler time, with smaller classes, and a smaller world. Heading south to Cannelton, a short drive along the Ohio River takes us to Lafayette Spring. It was named after a hero in the Revolutionary War, and the man that was like a son to George Washington, the Marquis de Lafayette. As the story goes, while touring the U.S. on a multi-city farewell tour, his boat sank in the Ohio River. He was taken to this spring until another boat could take him to Louisville. But as soon as local residents heard about the old war hero, they all came down to shake his hand. This is also the place where Abraham Lincoln and his family came to get a drink of water while traveling to their new home in Indiana. After all these years, the spring is still flowing. But I would not recommend taking a drink. I would recommend taking a photo next to this historic place. For our final destination, we travel further west to the town of Rockport, and an extraordinary ghost town. Behind this fence is an entire pioneer village, one that was never lived in. Let me explain. At the height of the Depression, artist George Honig had a crazy dream. He wanted to build a pioneer village as a memorial to Abraham Lincoln's life in Indiana. As luck would have it, the government created the Works Progress Administration to build all kinds of civil projects. They put people back to work, and this project sounded like a good one. It was a massive effort. You'll see reproductions of where the Lincolns lived. Where a young Abraham went to school. Church. Where he worked. And where he learned about the law. There's a story behind every single building. During the summer, reenactors tell these stories. It's a pretty remarkable but fairly unknown place. Any Abe Lincoln fan will love it. This is just another sample of what Southern Indiana has to offer. Ruins, forgotten histories, and many adventures along the back roads. Maybe it's time for a road trip.